Welcome back, everyone. We will now hear from a panel to reflect on today's forum. Please welcome back Barry Liden of Patient Engagement from Edwards Lifesciences, who will moderate the session and introduce the panel. Barry.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around so late. It's been a long day, I know, but this is the best part. You just wait. You waited till the icing on the cake. This is the point where we look back and kind of reflect on what it is that we've captured so far, and then we're also going to be hearing a little bit from FDA as to how it is that we can take this and move this forward. But I've got three prestigious panelists, or I'm going to call you guys reflectors. You're going to be reflecting back on what it is that we experienced today and kind of try to highlight. Almost imagine sitting there, we're going through a report of what we just gone through and highlighting what are the kind of key elements that we learned today that can really stand out and really kind of, if you were in an elevator telling somebody what a great event this was and you had one thing that you pulled away from it, what would that be? So we've got Jodi Duckhorn with FDA, who's I'm going to kick it off to first to give you an opportunity to kind of give you your perspective on what it is that we went over today, and maybe what, from FDA's perspective, you think we could be looking forward towards the future, and maybe even touch a little bit on how this might impact labeling, because I know you've got a little bit of background on labeling and communications with patients.
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to join the session. I was really impressed with all of the patient panels and what they had to say, specifically how health literate and well-versed they were in each of their conditions. And even with them being so versed in what they know, they still experience challenges. And so that really struck me as, we're talking to very knowledgeable people. What about the people who aren't so knowledgeable and don't have that kind of those resources to seek information? And so it also made me think specifically about you had patients who could research their devices as opposed to, I think as one patient said, kind of waking up in the OR with a device. These were really interesting perspectives that they brought. I really liked hearing from Ruth Day, and specifically about metacognition versus cognition and action. That's something I'd really like to see all of us doing more of. Message testing and really making sure that our intended audiences understand what it is that we're trying to convey to them, and in a way that they can understand, and making sure that we're really answering the kinds of questions that they have. Again, I was really struck by the patient who was talking about being in the audiovisual field and not being able to find answers to her questions, or the other patient had an uncle who needs to be able to do arc welding and may not be able to do that with the device that they have. So well, anyway, I'll let somebody else talk now, and I could go on for a long time. There was a lot of great things that came out today.
Great. Thanks for the watch. I really appreciate that. Speaking of patients, Heidi, Dohse, you've got a unique perspective, maybe unfair perspective, particularly given that we just went through this exercise around heart failure device, and you've got personal firsthand experience with that. I'm sure you don't necessarily see that as an advantage, but maybe it is your superpower. Anyway, what were your thoughts coming away from today, given your perspective on communicating with patients?
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Having sat through, from the kickoff this morning with Pamela kind of talking about the goals of MDIC through the different patient panels, just this amazing thread and theme that the patient voice and the patient experience matters. And, I've been a heart patient dealing with everything from implanted devices to heart failure to the unintended consequences that lead to things like open heart surgery. I've lived this journey for a long time all by myself, feeling like an island without any answers. And, fast forward to today where we have Dr. Google, we have WebMD, we have, many presentations that we listen to about industry beginning to really focus on building shared decision tools, really wanting to understand patient preferences and how to incorporate what's important to us as patients. So it was really great to hear the other patient panelists. Much of what they were saying resonated with me. So it's like, wow, this is awesome. I'm not just speaking for myself. Together, we're speaking for a much broader community. And I feel like this forum has been an amazing platform for being heard and sharing that with the many stakeholders in the industry.
Great. Well, thanks, Heidi. Appreciate that perspective. And Brett, as a number cruncher, senior economist at RTI, what's your takeaway from some of those? So do numbers matter when you're communicating things?
Well, yeah. So a couple things came out today that really stuck with me, and one of the things I really appreciate about the entire day is I was challenged throughout the day. I learned new things, and I have to say, with Zoom meetings, as many as I've been to lately, I often get to the end of the day and I think, oh, really? I just spent an entire day. But today was one of those days where I was constantly challenged and thought everything was so thought provoking for me. So I really do appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody who's been involved in this day. So the numbers matter part of it is, the last exercise that we did in the interactive exercise just reminded me and made it very, very clear to me how difficult it is to communicate numbers, but how important it is to communicate numbers. And I've been doing this for a long time, and we still haven't nailed it yet. Let me put it that way. So we need to continue to make sure that we do the best job that we can, and hopefully we continue to up our game as we do it. But I also heard I heard a couple things today that really stood out that I'd like to mention. And the first was someone mentioned early on in the day, and this has really stuck with me all day, that when we're talking with a patient with a chronic disease where technology is part of the treatment, technology becomes part of their life. And it's important to talk about the lifetime of the patient, not the life cycle of the device. And, as someone who develops patient preference surveys and talks to patients about their preferences, that perspective just totally flipped everything that I do in my mind on its head. Because what I think about is I have clinical data. How do I best present that to somebody coming out of a pivotal study and say, would you do this? That is my kind of narrow view of the world that is too narrow. The question becomes, what does this mean, down the line? And do we know? And that's where the uncertainty piece comes in. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. So not only do the numbers matter, but the context in which those numbers are presented really matters. And that for me has been completely broadened. And then the other thing that, I kept hearing today, and then came home again when we were doing that last interactive exercise, was in one sense, we need to keep it simple in order to be able to convey numbers to patients. At the same time, we need to make sure it's complete. And that tension, I think, will always be there. But for me, I get geeky and go for complete over simple. And I constantly need, and I think all of us do, when it comes to communicating things, we need to continue to figure out how to do it better. And for those of us who are so numbers driven, we need to be pulled back into the plain English kind of version of those numbers all the time. So that's what I got out of today, and I'm really grateful for that. So I appreciate everyone's input today.
I was challenged with the exact same thing that you just said. I really struggled with, and I always struggle with when we're developing communications, those who want to throw in all the data and all the kitchen sink, and the best practices concept of keeping things simple and streamlined and concise. And we even heard that from the patient panels who were saying, I want everything, I want to hear it all, I want all the data, but then I also want it to be concise and easy to read and this and that. And so there's the concept of what someone was describing as sort of the waterfall effect. You go here for the basics and then you keep clicking in more for more. But yeah, I was really struck by the exact same thing.
And I can, as a patient and someone who's been a medically device driven for 37 years, my need for numbers and data has changed over time. In the beginning, I just wanted to make sure that I was safe, and I just needed the numbers that made me not, help me to stop being afraid and feel safe enough to be confident that I was going to be okay. Fast forward 37 years later, and I'm my need for data and information is very different. So having access to getting that and being able to understand it and make it actionable in how I'm living my life is what's important.
Sounds like everybody's really kind of struggling with this less versus more complete, but make it simple, understanding what I need now versus what I'll need in a few years. It kind of reminds me of Anna Lagasse. I couldn't remember how to pronounce her last name. The double hip replacement at 13 or 14-year-old patient. Wow. Right. And at that time, she didn't have an alternative. That was kind of it. So did they describe to her in very much detail that they don't have a lot of evidence to support how long this is going to last? Because she's probably the first one they've ever done this with. And, sure enough, at 19, she was expecting, 20 some odd years. So that's another challenge that I think we have, and that is, how do you describe that which you don't know? If we don't know what the answer is for 20 years out, we got this new therapy, but we only studied it for 2 years, so we can't answer the question what your life's going to be like in 20 years. Do you guys think that matters from what you've heard from patients? Maybe I'll start with you, Heidi. Is it okay for the medical establishment to say, hey, we don't know, we have no idea?
Well, because if that's the truth, I think one of the things that we run into right now between the healthcare industry and providers and the patient is this misalignment of expectations. When the healthcare provider or the medical device manufacturer is saying, well, it's going to do X, and this is how long it will last. And so I, as the patient, think, okay, great, I'm going to go back to having the life I had before and everything's going to be wonderful. And then when that doesn't happen, or there's complications, because each of us is an individual and how things work in our bodies is going to be different. When those don't match up, that's where the frustration comes in. So it would be better to say, I don't know, but let's co-collaborate. And together, let's figure out the best course of action so that expectations are aligned, and the patient roles and responsibility and the doctor roles and responsibilities are both a part of the definition of a successful outcome.
Let me be devil's advocate for a second here and push this onto Jodi. Okay, great, but let's take the example of the 13-year-old who has no option, and maybe if she doesn't get the treatment, it could be life. It really potentially mean that she loses her life. I don't know. Maybe physicians at the time were kind of like, look, we need her to make this decision for her own sake. And if we give her too much information, she might delay treatment and that'll hurt her. So, let's just give her what she needs to know to make a good decision. So from FDA's perspective, I know if you always have to weigh that benefit risk, and some of that risk is not getting treated. So right. What is your perspective on how to address that?
I think it's ultimately, we put it out there, we put everything that we know out as much as possible, and it's really up to a provider to do that initial information sharing, and your information seeking patients will often do more information seeking. But in her case, if she at 13 didn't really have the decision to make, it was just going to happen. Or again, going back to the example of a patient who wakes up, in recovery because they had, a situation where they just had to have a stent put in or something. I think that goes into the conversation about patient labeling. And, we don't necessarily have patient labeling for everything, and maybe we should, because even though you didn't have a decision, you now have the ability to go back and look at it after the fact, and do more research after the fact. So to me, that might be a way to help people in that situation, just to seek information. And we put out whatever we have.
Okay. So last quick round, I'll start with Brett. What was one key takeaway or one thing that you would do differently as a result of some of the lessons that you learned today about how to better communicate?
So what I actually would do is I think I came from the perspective of I knew enough to do the draft and then get patient input on it. And, the more I do, the more I realize I know less than I think I do. And I continually get that lesson. And I think it's now before I do the first draft, it's get the patient perspective on it. I thought I was being helpful. I need more help.
Heidi, how about you?
Less kind of insights, lessons learned, and
The one thing that you would do that differently as a result of some of the things you learned today?
I don't think I would do anything different from today. I am excited that the things that I have been doing are now becoming the topics we're discussing. And so I'm really excited that we're, like, to Brett's point, engaging that patient voice before the first or the second draft, and it's just including us in the final version, but having us as part of the beginning of the discussion. So I feel like we're making really wonderful headway.
Great. Jodi, any last thoughts?
Yeah, for me, it was really about what Ruth Day was talking about. So we do message testing, but it gets more to that metacognition. And I'd really like to see us do more of the cognition and action testing. I think that's the next step. And she made it really clear in her data that that's where you see the difference between people really understanding versus saying they understand. Because people just generally think that they know more than they actually do, or remember more than they actually do. So I'd really like to be able to bring that into more of our practices in the agency.
Great, thanks. Well, Brett, Heidi, and Jodi, thanks so much for helping us wrap this day up in terms of reflecting. Now thinking about next steps, our speakers from FDA, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott, who will introduce our prestigious last speakers. Scott.
Great. Thank you, Barry, Brett, Jodi, and Heidi for that excellent panel. We'll now hear from Michelle Tarver, the Director of Patient Science and Engagement at CDRH. Following Michelle, we'll hear from Alicia Witters, the Director of the Division of Communication at CDRH. Michelle.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'd really like to thank MDIC for putting together such a thoughtful, well-planned patient engagement forum. I think it really did highlight the importance of putting the patient first in everything that we do. I also want to thank the patients and the speakers for sharing their perspectives, their experiences, and really helping us to see what it's like to be in that situation of making a decision about a medical device with limited information or with a lot of information, but not knowing how to organize it in that decision-making process. So thank you all very much for that. As you heard from Dr. Sherm this morning, patients are central to the work that we do at CDRH, and today really highlighted a number of themes that I'm going to touch on very quickly before I turn it over to my colleague, Alicia Witters. It really does support a lot of the efforts that we are doing to amplify and augment and integrate the patient's voice in the work that we do in terms of reviewing medical devices, but also upstream from the review process in how studies are designed, in terms of how devices are developed, encouraging the community to consider the patient's voice as well as at the post-market setting. I want to say a couple of themes that I did hear is that every patient's not the same, and we all know that. But it's very challenging when we as medical device regulators are looking to make a population-based decision and looking for valid evidence that can inform that population-based decision. And one of the elements that you heard discussed today was patient preference information. And we really do think that that is a way that we can get a perspective on what an individual patient may be experiencing in a well-defined, structured way that we can make inferences about that for the whole population. And we're doing a lot of work to see how can we integrate that along the total product life cycle for a medical device. Well, another thing we heard today is that, while we are focused as regulators on the total product life cycle of the device, there is this cycle of a device within a patient that also deserves consideration and discussion. And one of the things that we are doing at the center to try to help encourage that is collection of real-world data, understanding what the patient's journey is outside of a trial in the real world while they are living and doing the things that they normally do. How are they experiencing that device? Where are the challenges that they're experiencing, as well as the opportunities and the benefits that they're experiencing? So I think that's something also that I heard, and I thought, we're doing a lot in this space that can help, and we really are grateful that many of the patients that we get to work with to help amplify these efforts through MDIC's work, as well as with others in the industry. We heard a lot also about shared decision-making tools and the importance of trust. We know that there's nothing that replaces that healthcare provider and patient conversation, and that data and pages and social media sites don't replace it. But the availability of information to help patients make an informed decision is really important. But it's also critically important to have patients involved in the generation of that information so that it is designed in a way that it meets the patient community's needs and can help address some of the questions that they may have when they're at that critical position of making a decision about their care. So I know that Dr. Shuren talked a little bit about our collaborative community work, and that collaborative community effort in which we are participating in as members is really one of the highlights is having patients at the table side by side, working on tackling some of these challenges and generating solutions that we hope will be very impactful across the entire healthcare ecosystem. So clearly, having patients involved as part of the daily work that we do is important for all of us to really make impactful changes in public health. So I encourage you to consider inviting patients not just at the end, but across the entire development continuum, and including them in those conversations so that we can develop materials that meet their needs, hear the concerns that they're dealing with their medical devices, and then tailor solutions that better improve their ability to live a happy and healthy life. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alicia Witters, who will talk to you a little bit more about her thoughts on the communication efforts. Alicia?
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alicia Witters, and I'm the Director of the Division of Communication at the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health, which is a mouthful, so I'll call it CDRH for the rest of my remarks. First, I want to echo what Michelle and the other panelists mentioned and just thank the organizers of today's meeting and all of you, the participants, for sharing your experience and your perspectives throughout the day, both during the formal sessions and the interactive sessions. So among all the discussions today, I heard some key recurring themes around the need to put information in the hands of patients and healthcare providers in the most transparent, simple, and clear way possible. From my perspective as a professional communicator, a patient, a mother, a caregiver, those themes really resonate with me and are things that I've tried to incorporate into my work at the FDA every day. I heard a lot about the importance of engaging patients, which Michelle talked in depth about, and empowering patients to take part in the discussions that may ultimately impact their health. Clearly, any communication about medical devices should answer the questions patients need answered to help them understand their device and what they can expect in a way that's usable, accessible, and supports their healthcare decision-making and safety. The FDA has a role in making this information available to patients and providers, and we primarily do that through our website and partnerships with professional and patient groups. And we're taking steps so that in the future, the FDA can become more of a source for patients who are looking for information about medical devices. My division at the FDA is responsible for developing many of the communications about medical devices that you'll see on the FDA.gov website or receive by email if you're signed up for those. Today's meeting has been an incredible experience, and I've made a lot of notes from the discussions. I have the recordings, and I look forward to connecting with my FDA colleagues on what we heard and learned today. And even with all that feedback from today, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to consider giving the FDA even more feedback about communications that we put out about medical devices. So as Jeff Shuren mentioned this morning, CDRH is on a journey with patient engagement, and I'll add patient communication as part of that journey as well. So information from today's forum and the report out from today's meeting will support that journey that we're on to improve our communications about medical devices. Jeff and my colleague Michelle mentioned many of our past and ongoing efforts to incorporate public perspectives and the patient voice in the work of CDRH. And I want to share with you a little bit about what we're working on from the communication perspective. So our goal in all of our communications for FDA is to provide timely public information about medical devices in general, and especially when there is a new or increased safety concern that may change the benefit-risk profile for a medical device. Similar to what several participants raised today, we believe this information can support patients, healthcare professionals, and caregivers in making informed decisions about treatments and diagnostics. The FDA is here to work collaboratively with patients and other public stakeholders, and we're committed to improving how we communicate about medical devices. We recognize it's in the interest of public health to ensure that communication about medical devices is as clear and accessible as possible. Yesterday afternoon, we hosted a public meeting on our communications about the safety of medical devices. And it was the first public meeting we focused entirely on this topic around communication. And it was an incredible discussion among a panel of patients, healthcare providers, social scientists, medical device industry, and members of the media. And there was an incredibly rich dialogue on the challenges that patients face and when and what patients want to see in communications about medical devices, whether it's from us at the FDA or another source. In case you couldn't attend the public meeting, we'll have the recording of that posted on our website soon. But in the meantime, all the questions that were discussed during that meeting about what patients are looking for in a communication about the safety of medical devices are posted on the FDA.gov workshop and conferences page, and we'd love to have your feedback on the topics included there. We actually have an open public docket where you can share your preferences on the content and delivery of information, how we communicate about the safety of medical devices, especially from the FDA. And you can get to the docket from the workshops and conferences page I mentioned earlier on FDA.gov. We're always looking for ways to improve how the FDA communicates about medical devices. And we want to incorporate as much public feedback as possible through our open dockets, through what we heard today during the MDIC forum, and through future engagements and interactions with patients and other members of the public. So I hope you will consider sharing your comments to the docket, and that'll be open until January 19th, 2021. So there's still time. We also recently posted a discussion paper as part of the meeting materials for the October Patient Engagement Advisory Committee meeting, because we recognize medical devices are increasingly connected to hospital networks and the internet, and with all that connectedness, there's a risk of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It's just the reality of the 21st century healthcare system. And our discussion paper on cybersecurity focuses on communicating those vulnerabilities to patients and includes some science-based considerations for both the FDA as well as other federal partners and industry stakeholders to help thoughtfully inform patients and the public about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. This paper is based on feedback that we heard from attendees, including patients and healthcare providers, at our 2019 Patient Engagement Advisory Committee meeting. And we hope it can generate discussion and feedback on the elements that we believe can help make patients and the public aware of cybersecurity risks and what to do if a device that a patient is using is impacted by that. So we want to know, in this case, whether what we've outlined in the discussion paper will be helpful in communicating to patients and the public, and whether there's anything we've missed, because undoubtedly we've missed something. And that's really where we need you to provide us with feedback. So again, we have a public docket, which is open until December 21st, and you can get to that from the FDA.gov website as well. And the easiest way to get there is to just use the search terms FDA cybersecurity on our website or on Google. Any browser should get you there. So in closing, I want to reemphasize the FDA's commitment to providing clear communication to patients and all of our public audiences. We recognize there is so much more to do and a lot of work ahead of us, but today's discussions have given me and everyone participating today, I think, a lot of food for thought and insights that I know will help guide the FDA's work. So I thank you all for that.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Alicia, for those comments. Earlier at the beginning of the day, way back at the beginning of the day, Dr. Shurin and Pamela both referred to MDIC as a community. And I think as we look back throughout the day, we've seen that community well represented. We've seen industry, we've seen patient advocates, we've seen researchers and regulators, and most importantly, we've seen patients and been able to hear from patients and hear about the importance of communicating clearly, communicating as much evidence as the patient wants, and taking into account the life cycle of the patients when it comes to different medical devices. And I'm proud of the work that we've done, both as the Science of Patient Input Group and with this forum to advance the cause of this community and communication. To close now, I'd like to turn the time over to Lilian Recon Gonzalez, the Program Director of Clinical Science at MDIC, and she'll give our closing remarks. Liliana.
Thank you, Scott, for guiding us through today. And on behalf of MDIC and the Science of Patient Input Steering Committee, I would like to thank everyone for attending and participating today. A special thank you to the FDA who funded this event and to the patients who participated and shared their experiences with us. I hope everyone learned something new and that we can start to address some of the gaps identified in order to improve communications about benefit, risk, and uncertainty of medical devices to patients. MDIC will be releasing a report on the learnings from today's event. We would like to collect more of your great insights and feedback after the forum, so please take a few minutes to fill in the survey found in the chat to provide us with additional feedback. Have a great evening. Thank you.